Hey everybody, welcome back to Wrote Interviews. S.A. Baz Collins flying solo this week. So I'm doing this by the seat of my pants because normally Vance runs the show, but you're gonna have to put it with me because Vance has got some family things going on. So it's just me and our fabulous guests. So we're here for Written on the Edge, season 9, episode 20 interview. We'll be talking with our guest, Alan Lessick, and discussing their latest work. Get to know our guests. Alan Lessick is a member of the Berlin Queer Writer Circle, Zen practitioner, amateur figure skater, and queer activist. His debut novel, The Troubleseeker, was shortlisted for the Publishing Triangle's 2017 Ferro-Grumley Award for LGBTQ Fiction. Put the dentures back in. His nonfiction works and essays have been published by Lambda Literary, the Bay Area Reporter, Advocate, and San Francisco Bay Guardian. For 3 years, he moderated panels on queer fiction at the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, AWP conference, and served as on the board of the LGBTQ Writers Caucus. His second novel, Make the Dark Night Shine, let me say that again. His second novel, Make the Dark Night Shine, was awarded the Literary Titan and is a Kirkus Review recommended book. Alan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. I'm excited to talk about the book and writing.
And yeah, so let's get into that. So what was the impetus that started this whole writing process for you? I mean, when did you catch the bug? And like all gay writers, is Endora your muse? We all have a thing that we think maybe Endora is our muse because she likes to mess with us.
No, that's not my muse, but I actually recently discovered something like second grade that I had written a story, that got published in our school newspaper in second grade.
Wow.
But then, then my literary career didn't really happen for many, many, many decades later. And the main reason was, and this is like, if people get one thing out of this podcast, it's do not believe that you have to know anything about outlining. When I was in high school and college, and you had to write papers, and you had to outline, I couldn't do it. I was stuck. I could write great papers, but I could never outline the things.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're on, and you had to turn in the outline first, and I never could do that. And so I thought, like, I'm not a writer. I can't do that. Later, I discovered that virtually no novelist ever outline.
Yep.
If you're nonfiction writer, yes, you're probably outlining, but fiction writers almost never outline. So yeah, it happened just about 12 years ago. My partner died. He had a really fascinating family personal history. And I was the only one left with it. And my friends were saying, "Oh, Alan, you need to write. You're a good writer." I said, I can't do this. NaNoWriMo came up, National Novel Writing Month. A friend of mine convinced me to do it. He was doing it. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I just sat down on the third day and started writing. And then realized very quickly, even though if I'm basing it on his life story, there's so much I didn't know that I had to make things up. And then magically, all these other characters coming in, Greek gods and Santeria gods and all sorts of things were happening. And 45 days later, I had 50,000 words, 60,000 words. And I thought I was Jack Kerouac, so I thought I wrote the spontaneous novel. And then many friends who are writers said, "No, you just got started."
That's draft one.
Yes, exactly. So 11 drafts later, it was published by Chelsea Station Editions. And yeah, they got me started. And so I had something to hold on to say, I'm a writer now.
That's excellent. I love that. So tell me a bit about the book that we're discussing today, which is Make the Dark Night Shine.
Yeah. So it's a love letter from a father to the daughter he never met.
Okay.
Takes place between the two world wars in Constantinople, Paris, London, New York, Japan. Yeah, those places. And it was inspired by a family story. And when I was visiting my Aunt Nina, she was 91, And she said, Alan, the kids did some research and it looks like my father was looking for me. And she had grown up never knowing her father. And I said, really? And she said, yeah, there's a Japanese diplomat who came to the US in the 30s and traveled across the country and was in New York. And then he left for Europe. And she said, and she was living in New York. And she said, when she was in New York, I know he was looking for me. And at 91, she had this gleam in her eye that my father loved me.
Mm.
Instantaneously, I just like, whoa, there's a story there. What is his story? And I said, Nina, I need to write the story. And Nina was a radical from the beginning. When I came out, she sent me a letter congratulating me for joining in a press class and said, I've always loved you as my nephew, but
I
now,
haven't found that Hallmark card yet.
yes. And she just said, I always have loved you, but as a member of the press class, I love you even more now. And so that was Nina. And so she looked at me and she said, Alan, men have appropriated women's stories from the beginning of time, and I'm not about to let that happen. Now, I was a bit crestfallen. I mean, I only had the idea, but I was still like, oh. And then she said, okay, Alan, I'm 91. I've been trying to write this forever. It's never happened. I have literally not a word to show you of anything I've written, and I'm not going to do it. So yes, you can do it. You can write the story. And my first sentence to her afterwards was, it's going to be different, meaning that I only know how to write about gay men. So I knew her father was gay. The only problem was that I had to figure out somewhere along the line how he was going to have sex with a woman at some point to have this child. But other than that, I knew from the beginning he was going to be gay. Yeah.
So, and it's basically a story about fictional telling of a Japanese man's identity in the 20th century. Is it in the early 20th century?
Yeah. It starts in, the story opens in Constantinople in 1919, although he has a little bit of his backstory from Japan that he talks about as he's telling the story.
So
the story is actually,
where does it take place predominantly?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay.
I would say it takes place predominantly in Japan. So the majority of the time is in Japan. Yeah, so the story is written as essentially a letter. So the bombs are dropping, he's in London, the German Blitz is happening, he's under house arrest there, and his job is to search for dead bodies after the buildings get bombed. And so he knows that there's a really good chance that his building will be next. So he decides that he wants to write this letter to give something to his daughter if he dies. And so the entire thing is his story told in the first person with asides to his daughter Nina throughout the entire book. And so he has this understanding that, he's in a place of thinking, I want to tell her the truth. I want to tell her everything. And yet we're human. And so we also just want to tell them our story as we would like to see it.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that drives readers crazy is that he's a really unperfect person. And later on, he becomes a Zen monk. And so he writes a lot about that. But he's still an imperfect person, and he knows it, but he doesn't know it. So he thinks that, like we all do, that we can do this next. This is what's going to happen, and I'm going to do this. And then, as a Zen monk, he kind of has to back off from that and say, oh, well, I intend to do that. Whether it happens, I don't know what's going to happen, how I will react. And so he really wants to fix the world, and he can't always do it.
Mm. Mm. So how long of a period does it cover in this story?
So he starts writing. So he's writing in 1941. So it kind of ends in 1941, and it covers his life. He was born in the late 1800s, like 1898 or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mainly covering the years between the two world wars pretty closely.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Is there anything you want people to know about how the queer representation you're writing about happens during that era?
Say that again.
Is there anything you want readers to be aware of that maybe you want to highlight that as a
Oh,
kind of
sure.
a hook for people to, if I walked up to you and at a
Yeah,
book fair and said, well,
yeah,
what's this about? What would you
yeah.
tell me?
So the interesting one of the interesting parts is that the main character Kenzo Uchida is he doesn't call himself a gay man, but he's in a relationship with another man, his partner Mitsu. And in Japanese samurai culture, there was something called Shudo.
Mm-hmm.
And Shudo was a same-sex relationship. And 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 people tell me, like, well, we don't know if that's true. And it's like, no, the reality is anytime men were got together, lived together, whether they were monks, whether in the army, whether it's another circumstance, some of them were having sex, but a number of them were building relationships with each other.
Right,
So
right.
this is that unseen history that we don't know
Well,
lots
it's the
about.
straight washed version of history that we have
Yeah.
to constantly push back on.
Um, so that when I did the research, I discovered this Shudo relationship,
Mm-hmm.
which was a relationship of support, um, a kind of training relationship between two men, certainly a sexual relationship between two men. So he's not embarrassed about that. He has no shame about being in this relationship. He sees that as fundamentally Japanese, one way of being Japanese. He gets to Constantinople, and after like the first couple of weeks he's there, the British ambassador, which is and Edmund Kinver was actually named after a friend of mine who was from London, who was this wonderful, amazing. He was a Catholic priest that was doing sex therapy work, had been with his partner for 30 years, and was working in one of the biggest aid foundations in London at the time and helping form it. But he was a Catholic priest. Anyway, the British ambassador said, "Hey, I realize the relationship you guys have, but it won't work. There's going to be stories, and so you need a beard." And Kenzo goes, "A beard? You guys have mustaches. What's a beard?" He said, "You need a woman who's going to be by your side." He said, "We all have them here. All the entire British delegation here has them. And you need one just to be with you." So he meets a woman in a nightclub, a Ukrainian Jewish refugee who's a cigarette girl there, who has desires of being something bigger and better. And she sees this as the chance of her life. And so she becomes his consort. And so the three of them, Mitsu, his partner, Kenzo, and Alyssa, all start to have these adventures. And then there's a fourth character called Gul, who is a Turkish guy who is working in the Japanese consulate and knows everyone everywhere, also another gay man that's always kind of guiding them through all sorts of stuff. So those are the four main characters that start the book off, and it's their interweaving of their stories that we get.
Okay, okay. So here's the side question that's burning in my side, right? And to ask you, what do you think Nina would have thought of it?
Actually, so Nina died within the year
Okay,
of our conversation.
right.
Um,
But what do you think she
and
would have thought of your final work?
yeah, I think she would have been proud of it. I did a book reading in Nina's hometown
Uh-huh.
where my cousin lives.
Uh-huh.
And this was the scariest thing in the world of doing a reading about someone's mother.
Wow. Yeah.
And my cousin had read it, and we had this long, long discussion, and she was really annoyed by the main character, like who would have been her grandfather. She was really annoyed by him. And as we talked about it, I just kept, but I don't get it. Why are you annoyed? And finally she said, "Well, but he never saw my mom. Like he had a chance and he never saw her." I said, "But Marion, that was reality." And she looked at me after we talked about it for a while. She looked at me, she said, "I just wanted something different." I just wanted her story to be different. So, which was just how heartwarming is that, that my own cousin in a book about her mother just wanted it to be different for her mother's sake and maybe her sake. Um, and I just said, no, I wrote,
Life
that was
doesn't go
part of
that
the
way.
story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I wrote the story based on this is what really the story was, is that he wasn't there. So yeah, I thought that to me that was really quite amazing and quite beautiful that as a writer, my own cousin who knew the real story that inspired all this stuff was still at the end like, no, you can't do this to me. And I'm
Then
not giving anything away in the book by telling you that he doesn't see her, because in the beginning, I mean, in the very first chapter, he's in London, the bombs are going down. He's going, I never met you. I never met you. This is why I'm sending this to you. Hopefully in the future, you'll get this.
Yeah.
So I'm not giving a key plot device away.
Okay. Okay. Good. Good. So you have a note here in our show notes that you wanted to talk a little bit about how novels preserve queer culture, and it's something that's near and dear to Vance's and my heart. That's why we do this podcast.
Yeah.
We see ourselves of chronologizing and journalizing queer creators, so we can make sure that nobody can say, well, I don't know who to buy from, I don't know what's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Our whole purpose is to catalog this so people have the chance to find talent that's out there.
Yeah, yeah.
So talk a little bit about that part of your passion in writing.
Yeah, okay. Oops, just sidebar for a second.
Sure.
I need to have touched the camera. Oops, sorry, I'll get it back again. Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
There you go.
There we go.
Okay,
Yeah,
on
so
sidebar.
yeah, so the what we know, and we alluded to this already in the program, is that history is made by the people in charge of history. Usually straight white men, usually people with the power, with the money, with everything. And so the only places that we get inklings of our history, especially as queer folks, is through writing and through and so when I remember when I came out, I started reading every gay book I could find. I was, and not the classic old ones, but anything modern. I mean, Ethan Morton at the time. And so I was reading all these books because I wanted to find out, how do gay men live? What do they do? What do they think about? How does this all work? And in that, you get all these glimpses of this, all the knowledge we have. I mean, any group of people, gay people, African-American people, Latino, any number of groups of people have this internal knowledge that we all know about, but the outside world doesn't. And so when you look at, right now, if you look at what would be, quote unquote, the history of AIDS, most of it doesn't have anything to do with what you and I and millions of other queer folks went through. It has nothing to do with that. And the only place you find that are in novels. Even in nonfiction work, you find it, but it's not exactly the same. But in novels, you're getting at the nitty-gritty of how it felt to watch someone die. What was it like to be there? What was the fear? What was the excitement? And it was interesting when COVID started, my first thing I wrote I was actually for a radio program in the Bay Area. The first thing I wrote was how gay men were being re-traumatized by COVID, because here was another virus. It could kill everyone, and even though it wasn't sexually transmitted, even though it wasn't our fault this time, some of us were getting blamed for it anyway, because you have to find someone to blame. It's like, pick on the queers if we're going to, have something new coming through. But they were
if we only had half the power that they think we have.
I know. Exactly. But the thing is that it was triggering people because they just were remembering the hopelessness in those times. And that's what I wrote about in my very first piece. I wrote 3 pieces about COVID. And that was the first one I wrote about. I was like, no, this is different, guys. Like, we don't have to react the same way, but the reality is we are, because we are being triggered, and that trauma is with us. And that's not something that's in the history books. And the beauty of our lives, the things that we do, this idea that these two Japanese guys could be just having kind of the time of their life, supporting each other, loving each other, doing stuff, and living in a place where, they're under the radar, but because they're a public figure, they could be in the radar. So that it also just talks about how we act, what we do.
Yeah,
And
it's the privacy element within our human nature that is what a lot of straight washing is built upon, because people who are in that kind of community, whether they're out in their community or even, closeted within that community, you don't really know everything about everyone. So it's like,
Yeah.
you could have a married guy with kids and family, and he has this whole other life that is going on that even they're not aware of. And so whenever they straight wash things, I always go back to that archaeology thing where they had the two skeletons who were huddled together, and they said, oh, it's the lovers. They kept calling it the lovers. And then they did DNA tests and found out that it was two male figures. And then suddenly that title went away. It was like, come on, people, we're here all the time, and to your point, I think that's really what's at the crux of why queer people write, and why we should encourage other queer people to write,
And one of the things that in my two novels so far, and I think it will be in my next one, is I give my queer characters a superpower that unfortunately doesn't exist as well in real life. And that superpower is, none of my main characters have ever been ashamed of their queer life. They may be ashamed of other things. They may be ashamed of all sorts of things. And in this book, Kenzo is at the end, not at the end, but when he finds out he has this kid, he's like, oh my God, how could I have the kid and I don't know about it, and I'm so far away, and what did happen? But being queer, he's never ashamed of. And in my first book, the same thing, the main character was just never ashamed of being gay. He had really awful things happen to him, but he didn't have to go through that shame part. So that's where I deviate from reality a bit,
well,
because
I don't know. I'll let me give you something from my own past. When I came up in the 70s and 80s, I'm a Gen X kid. When I came up in the 70s and 80s, I didn't hide who I was, and my parents, except in fact, my dad told my mom that he knew when she was pregnant with me that she was pregnant, and that I was probably going to be gay. And he knew from that moment around conception. And then he just waited and watched as I grew up for the signs that any of that would happen. Right. Anyways, I never had shame at all growing up. And in fact, if somebody came at me with it, it was always their problem. I could never, I would get angry. I would not cower in shame. I would actually lean into it, and I would get angry that they were saying and doing this, because it's not anything I'm doing. I'm just being. It's your problem because you're the one making the problem. So to add to your, it's a superpower we can have. We just have to grab those reins and do it. That's not an easy thing. I will admit it's not an easy thing, but it does exist in some of us.
No, and I agree. I absolutely agree. And I just think that, at least my experiences in a lot of queer writing, it's a passage. There's a passage it needs to go through, and sometimes it's all about that. And I just want to say, okay, these guys don't need that passage, so they get to deal with other things in their life, which are real, which we all do.
And I will tell you, we had an interview about, must have been about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. My granddaughter was part of it, and she's queer. And we had two young queer kids on. And they were talking about, they're in their teens, like late teens. And they were talking about, and one of the things they brought up was that they get the coming out stories are relevant, and they're pertinent to the community. However, in their generation, coming out is not the big all be all end all. It now, when they meet new kids of their age, they just say, oh, so how do you identify? They just ask it straight out, and they're over it. It's done. It's a past thing. So, but their comment to us as writers was, we want to see what else these queer people do and what else they are. So our audience is already there for us.
Exactly.
This is the kids asking for exactly what you're doing. You're allowing them to do other things. That's what they want to see. So for us writers, that's an open invitation to just say, move beyond this. Just go out there, make them queer, let them do what they're going to do, and write about that,
Exactly.
And you can still have all the flaws. You can still have all kinds of personality quirks and stuff, so you're not giving up on any of that. It's allowing you to move away from just these core colors that you've been able to play with in the coloring book. Now you've got the big box of crayons,
Well, when I came out, I thought, great, this is done. All my problems are solved. Like, this was the only thing, this was it. And then after about a year or two, it's like, oh, all these other problems are
still there.
They're still in my life. We're still there. And I thought, no, I'm cured of everything. So and that's what I think that's, it's just a good, again, with the characters I do have, because we're all human, they all have flaws. And so that I write about these ways that we try to manage to cope with life, with what we have and the experiences we have. And that's really what life is about. That's all we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the final note you have here is it's something that it really intrigues me. You have a note here about queer Zen Buddhism. So I'm curious, what is that all about?
Well, so I have spent a lot of time on very spiritual paths, and I never was part of the Christian one so much at all. So I never had to get over that, the way a lot of people have to at some point in their lives. But about 14 years ago, I discovered Zen Buddhism, and in modern Zen, there's a series of what are called precepts, which are kind of behavioral rules. And a lot of times people equate them with the Ten Commandments. They like, you're not supposed to kill people, and you're not supposed to, rip people off and do stuff like that.
Right.
But one of the precepts is not to abuse sexuality. And so I thought, oh, I can so not do this precept. So of course my teacher was a lesbian. and the former abbot of the Zen Center. And she just said, no, Alan, this is about entering into any relationship with the full honesty and openness of the relationship, whatever it is.
Right.
And so when you're abusing it, you're not doing that.
Right.
And so, and so that opened this huge door. Also, just even to think about it, because I know lots of folks in the S&M community, for example, as that they're still in that door. They're still
because it's consensual.
When it's consensual, when everyone knows what they're doing, that's cool. And so I got involved there was a queer Dharma group at the San Francisco Zen Center. I've done some working with some stuff in Berlin now. And so this idea, and when I do tours about the book, I get a lot of people asking, like, I'm queer, can I really be a Buddhist? And I said, yeah, so this is the reality. And again, at the old monastery where part of this book takes place was in the original Zen monastery, which I visited in Japan. They're having sex there too. But in the book, he brings it up to his teacher, and his teacher said, oh, we all know, like, you're living in a tight community. We all know what's happening here.
Right.
And it's only the secret that's the problem. That was the answer. It's when you have the secret, then you're withholding from yourself and from us. But being in the open, that's not a problem.
Right.
So there's a lot about the book. The chapter titles come from what I call a poem that the founder of Zen Buddhism wrote nearly 600 years ago now. And there's this long kind of poem he wrote about what Zen is about. And I use that as kind of a framework. Some of the things he says in his poems, I have people say in the book,
Mm-hmm.
because I want to take this out of this context of you can only be Zen if you go to a monastery or if you do this or you do that. I want people to recognize that there's a way of living, there's an ethical way of living, and there's a mindful way of living.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's what Ken's always struggling with so many times is he's trying to be super mindful, be a teacher, and at the same time, he gets caught up in the traps we all get caught up in.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is that a mindful person eventually recognizes those.
Right.
And then like, oh, I just went down that path that I didn't really want to go down. And unmindful people go down the path, they get angry at other people, they do all sorts of other stuff. But mindful people, I mean, they still have all these emotions. And my interpretation of this thing called enlightenment, which I don't even know what it is, really is that it includes all the emotions we have. So our emotions of anger or frustration or jealousy, it's all there. That's all part of it. So it's not that we have to get rid of it, but we just have to realize when we're doing it, we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to come to that's when we have to come to like an awareness of like, oh, so what do I do with this? Like if I'm really, when it's really angry and jealous at my ex-partner, I had to just deal with, okay, yeah, I know I'm having those feelings, but what does that mean for us?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean for the relationship? And how do we work that through? So Zen is actually a kind of big part of the book. And he starts off in the beginning mentioning that, he's this monk, he's learned things, and he would also like to have his daughter learn about this over time.
Oh, excellent. Well, in that vein, before we get to our get to know you questions, is there anything I didn't think to ask about the book that you want people to know about?
No, I can't. I can't think of anything right now. I think it's yeah, no, it's
Okay,
good.
fair enough. I just want to make sure that we didn't omit anything that you did want to talk about with the book.
Oh,
All
we
right, so
probably
before,
have. I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
think.
Well, well, you can come back. There you go. Okay, so let's get to know Alan a little more. Here in our year of diving deeper, what is your favorite writing snack or drink?
I really don't have one, but I'll just say mint tea. I mean, I drink tea when I'm
No,
writing.
there's no problem with that. All right. What books did you read growing up?
So my very first book was Cat in the Hat. I was in first grade, and I remember I have this really amazing. I have this memory of like going through the first page, which is like 4 sentences long. It's a cold, stormy night or whatever it was. I forget now. But anyway, it was 4 sentences long. And I just like spent hours like reading. It was the first time reading. It's like, oh, that's that word. Okay, I know the letters. And reading it. And I was like, and I finished the first page and I was like, oh, I did it. I'm done. I'm a reader. And then I opened the next page. It's like, oh my God, there's an entire book here. What am I going to do? I was so upset. But Cat in the Hat was my very first reading book that I remember.
Okay.
I used to go to the library. I discovered at some point the Hardy Boys series,
Uh-huh.
and finished all those, of course. And then in the same section in my library was all the Nancy Drew novels. And I kind of thought, I'm probably not supposed to read these things, but I read all the Nancy Drew novels as well. So those are my first. And then later on, when we would have a bookmobile come to school in elementary school, and I would have a limited amount of money, and and this is how I was thinking as a little kid. I still kind of think this way sometimes. I had just a limited amount of money. So I would like, what book could I buy that for the amount of money I had the most words in it? So I wound up buying and reading all the Michener novels, like when I was in 6th grade. and War and Peace because it was big. So those are
Tons of
some,
reading there.
that was some of my early influences.
Okay. So you've got Dr. Seuss on one side and James Michener on the other. I think you're covered. I think you're covered.
And Tolstoy, and Tolstoy.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, who's been the biggest supporter of your writing?
Um, that's a good question. Actually, I mean, I would say I'm the biggest supporter. I would say, actually, I'll go back to my two editors, my two publishers have been my biggest supporter. Yeah, when I went to Chelsea Station Editions with the Troubleseekers, I went directly to the publisher, and Jim Courier read it and like said, "Yeah, I'll print this. I'll work with you on this." And I thought, wow, I'm like really a writer. Like someone wants me. I mean, this is after going through like trying to get an agent for several
Right.
years.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so the second time I did that, Jim was no longer in business, and so but he said, Sven Davison over at a new press called Rebel Satori Press might be interested in this particular book, and he wrote a note to Sven, said, "Hey, can you look at this?" And Sven wrote back and said, "Hey, I'm booked up for next year, but if another publisher is recommending it, let me look at it." And 3 weeks later, he wrote back and said, "I want to publish it." So yeah, I think my publishers are my biggest
We
support.
love Sven. We really do.
Yeah,
He's been on our show, and we really really admire what he's doing. All right.
yeah,
So, are you a morning person or a night owl?
neither. I'm just a person.
You're
I just
just
do
a, you're just a human being out there
I
doing
just I just a human being that can write late at night, early in the morning. It depends when I get around to it.
it. Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, what's your favorite hobby outside of writing?
Hmm, I wonder what that is.
Mm,
Um, I 22
do
years ago,
tell.
22 years ago, I started figure skating. And the same guy tried to get me in, who got me into writing in NaNoWriMo, my friend Dave, said, "We're going to go to the gay games. And so you need a sport." Well, he needed a sport too. And so we first tried wrestling, which sounds really hot, except all the wrestlers were damaged and like had things broken. And it was like, no, I don't do that.
Right, right.
And so I had just broken up with my partner. I walked by the skating rink and I saw they were having lessons. And I thought, I've always wanted to skate. And kind of went home that night and realized, oh, I don't have anyone to ask or talk about this. I just could ask myself and said, "Alan, do you want to go skate? You want to learn how to skate?" And, "Yeah, you should do that." So I went back the next day. Shock of all shock, discovered that all the men that were there were queer.
Funny thing that.
Um, and uh, and 2 years later, I was skating in the gay games in Sydney. And there I met another guy who was from the Bay Area, and we saw the pair skaters, and we decided we need to do pair skating. So we started pair skating for the Chicago Gay Games. And in between that, as we were preparing, we were kicked off the ice rink in Berkeley, California, of all places, for holding hands on the ice together. And it happened once, and we were just like shocked. And when it happened the second time, we both turned around and said, "You're picking on the wrong queer people." And within a half an hour, it was 45 minutes, we had the National Center for Lesbian Rights Sports Project on our back and sued them. We went through the discrimination thing, we settled out, and Berkeley had to apologize, had to have a huge sign saying they would never discriminate against anyone. And in case we are, here's the number to call to report us. That's how my skating career got started. And I was just in an international competition last week and got a third place skating to Vicky Carr's "It Must Be Him."
Oh,
It
I
must be
love that
him, it
song.
must be
Yeah.
him, or
Oh,
I
it's
will
one of
die.
the
Yes,
best. It's one
yes,
of the
yes.
best.
Not that I pick out queer
Right.
theme songs. I do all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally love that. All right. So, has writing and publishing a book changed the way you see yourself?
Yeah. Well, so I'm living in Berlin right now, and I moved to Berlin 2.5 years ago. And one of the easiest ways, or one of the ways to get a long-term visa in Berlin is to be an artist. That's one of they prioritize different German states prioritize different things. Most of the time it's IT and mechanical engineering, stuff like that. And Berlin is the only place in the entirety of Europe that prioritizes artists. And so I am officially on my visa, it says I'm a Schriftsteller, I'm an author. And when I introduce myself, that's who I am. And it's amazing. Because I spent other careers of my life in the US, and I'm just known as the author guy now.
Excellent. I love that. All right. Well, if you were to write a spin-off about a side character of yours, which one would you pick?
Well, in my first book, there in the Santeria gods, there's a god called Babalu. Um, and you might remember Babalu if anyone watched the old Lucy programs.
Yeah.
And so they put that Babalu a lot. So Babalu it turns out, was like one of the really most powerful Santeria gods. And so when Ricky Ricardo was like drumming to Babalu, he's actually going into a
Yeah.
trance.
Yeah.
It was like amazing.
It's a
So
real
Babalu,
thing.
it's a real thing. So Babalu was always the god of sickness and healing from sickness. And in fact, in the 90s, in the Caribbean and in Brazil and Africa, Babalu became the god of AIDS. And so, and his story is that in my book, his story is he's actually the god of the viruses and the bacteria. Like everyone likes the big stuff, like they want to be the god of oceans or the lions or the
Right, right,
animals
right,
and
right, right.
trees. He's just the god of the tiniest little things, and everyone makes fun of him for it. But he says, look, I'm the one who controls everything. And we just saw that in the last pandemic.
Right,
It happened
right.
again.
Yep.
And so Babalu has the most interesting backstory. And when I first wrote, when I wrote that novel, a lot of the people in the AIDS community were going like, okay, huh, I don't know what to think about that, but actually that works. Because
Yeah, yeah.
my question was, how can you be the god of disease and of curing disease at the same time? Isn't that like opposite? But if you're actually the god of the beings that cause this stuff, then you can do both. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Plus, didn't they ever watch the Disney movie Sword in the Stone? Come on, Merlin got to Mad Madam Mim by turning into a virus. That's how he got
Yes.
her. So the smallest things can make the biggest difference.
Right.
All right. Have you ever traveled as research for your books?
So yes, one of the things that is important to me is the kind of historical accuracy. And so in this last book, I've been to Istanbul, I've been to Japan, I've been to the temples that I talk about in Japan. Obviously, I've been to Paris, been to London, New York. But I'm really keen on, as a historical novelist, not changing the historical facts. So like I had this whole thing set up. I knew Kenzo was going back home, and that there's something called the Great uh, spacing out right now. But there was a major earthquake in Japan that
Okay.
happened, and I had to have him back exactly before that. But my original plan was he was going to be back later. And then it's like when I found out the date, it's like, oh, I have to like rewrite all this section to get him there earlier. And the one that I missed the most though is, it's 20s in Paris. So who should be there? Josephine Baker has to be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the icon of the 20s. And so Josephine Baker was there, and I was writing about her, and blah, 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 blah. And then in the very last edit, just before I turned the final thing in, I thought, let's just check that fact. It turns out she didn't show up for a couple years later. She came in the late 20s
Late.
before I had to so Gertrude Stein's there, Picasso's there. So I have my people there,
Right, right.
but
The moderns are there.
Joseph, but Josephine Baker was not there, and I had to be true to the reality.
Right,
I mean, no
right,
one else really cares about it. I could have left her in, and no, one person would eventually said, "Alan, no, she wasn't there at the time," but I
yeah,
didn't want that person to show up, so
right, right.
I,
Better to nip that one in the bud. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
All right. Finally, how do you celebrate when you finish your book,
I
or
don't
do you?
actually.
You
No, I
don't?
don't. I mean, it's because when is it done?
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I mean, is it done after the 11th edit? Is it done after after the publisher takes it? Is it done after it actually comes out? And each of those phases, I mean, I'm in the, it was published in October. I'm in the publicity phase. I'm
Right,
still
right,
doing lots of publicity. So it's not done, and it's not done until the next book starts.
right.
Um,
And
and I
often a lot
have
of authors start right in, and while that one's going into the galleys and all that stuff. A lot
yeah,
of authors are right into it doing something else already, they're constantly in that
yeah,
creation mode, kind of thing.
yeah. I mean, it's things are bubbling in my mind around the next project, but the what I know is except if you're very famous, and except if you are very famous and have a major publisher behind you, um, authors have to do all their own work.
Yeah.
Um, and so I've done 2 book tours, 3 book tours now. I have to arrange all that stuff. I have to arrange for getting reviews. There's a lot of work to be done. And
Hmm.
so I can't, I knew that from the first book. So I just said, I'm really not going to start writing the next thing until about a year, because then that's when things by then are slower and I can actually pay attention to the next thing that's going to come out.
Oh, excellent.
And
Well,
what I know is,
go
as a
ahead.
teaser, what I know is I've written the first chapter of the next book, and it's called right now, it's being called A Little History of Boots, and the boots themselves are going to narrate part of the story.
Oh, excellent. Love that. Love that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you made it through our list. Bravo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. So, what's happening next for you? You said you started to write on a new work there, and you gave us a little teaser. But are there any readings you're doing? Are there any other ways that people can stay in contact with you? And what's the best place for people to follow you on social media to
Yeah,
know what's going on with you?
sure. Well, I hear that there's this fabulous podcast coming out next week that
Hmm.
everyone should be listening to.
Hmm.
Um, if I'm allowed to say that on this
Yeah,
program.
right. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'm on Instagram under Troubleseeker, the Troubleseeker,
Okay.
which is the title of the first book. Alan Lessick on Facebook and other sort of places, alanlessick.com for my website. I'll be doing a book tour in the UK in September again. And when I do that, I put it all out everywhere. Um, and yeah, those are the plans I have right now. I'm doing a couple things in Germany, which I'm really excited about, in
Oh,
English so
yeah.
far.
Oh, okay. Good.
And I'm trying to get my book published in German. So this is like, yeah. So I went through it once. I mean, it's hard enough getting it published, and then now it's like, oh, you want to translate this thing, and you want to be interested in this book. So it's a whole other world.
Yeah.
Um, but that's my next goal, because all my German friends are saying, "Great, you wrote this book, but we don't understand it. So can you just write it in German?" Which I can't do, but
Right, right.
can you get it in German?
And it's weird because with all of the AI stuff going on, you think, oh, well, but then you're not speaking the language. You don't know if the idioms are right. You don't know, so there's so many things that are still left in the air that even though AI is on our horizon, you don't know because we take our art so seriously, you don't
Yeah.
know if you can trust that it's going to get
What
it right,
uh, the 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 crux of the AI problem was explained to me by a gay man, which is AI will never know the feeling at 2:30 in the morning in the back room in a bar.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's just never that couldn't even come close to what that horrific feeling like, okay, it's either now or never
Right,
with
right,
whoever's here.
right, right. Before the lights come on and we all look like roaches scurrying under the rocks.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's where especially as novelists, I think we have, we're not safe from AI, but we have us we have our own superpowers that AI will not have. I don't
Right.
believe it ever will have. And because AI is based on straight bros and their language and the volumes of stuff that are being put in there, it's never going to talk about our experience the way we talk about our experience. So going back to queer history, it's never going to tell us that history and talk the way we talk.
Right, exactly. And it won't know how to, I don't think it would have a way of extrapolating straight washing when it's present. It would not sense it the way we would,
Oh, no,
from our own
I mean, it
experiences.
doesn't already, it's wiping out feminism. It's wiping out African-American voices because they don't exist in this corpus that they're using. So how is it ever going to do anything? And it will never have the eye roll. It won't know how to do the eye roll.
Yeah, right. Or the side eye.
Yes. Not that I've seen it on this program at all.
Oh, no, of course not.
Or the hands.
Right. All right.
So many things I will not do.
Well, is there any other final words of wisdom you want to impart to our listeners and viewers?
I would just, I go back to read books, read novels. It's the way it's not only does it keep some people, employed and occupied, but it's the beautiful way to experience the world that you may or may not be able to do by yourself.
Yes,
do it.
Support your queer content creators. Definitely do that. And do it from the publishers. Don't go to Amazon. Go to the publisher sites and buy from the publishers directly. Right? Let's do it correctly, people. When we talk about Zen, let's do it correctly. Yeah. Do it thoughtfully, do it intentionally. Buy from the publishers. Yes. They're the ones you should be buying from. All right. So with that, we'd like to have a huge thank you out to Ellen for being on the show. Ellen, thanks so much for stopping by. We at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by queer content creators. If you enjoy learning about new artists or hearing our thoughts on entertainment media, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. This show is produced by Rogue Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.ropepodcast.com. Tune in next week for your queer media fix.
What's that? Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.